Welcome to the Painting Coach, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to paint some Tempestus Aquilons for the brand new Kill Team Hivestorm box. A huge thank you to Games Workshop for sending this out to me early so I can create this content. I'm going to paint a scheme that's a little bit similar but also quite a bit different to what's on the box. So without any further ado, let's get painting. So I've primed the model with Chaos Black. I've then taken some thinned down Abaddon Black and painted this all over the models. This is to unify the black colour so that if I make mistakes, it's really easy to fix up later on. To get started painting the model, the first thing I do is paint all of the silver bits, and the colour I'm using for this is dark aluminium from Vallejo Metal Colour. There are quite a few bits to paint silver, so make sure you check the box art if you're not 100% sure. We've got things like the power pack, the connectors, the pipes, the tubes, the power sword, and also don't forget we've got all the trim across the armour as well. Now be as tidy as you can with this. It is easy to fix later on, but the tidier you are, the less time it's going to take. I'm going to paint all of the undersuit next, and the colour I'm using for this is Lupercal Green. Now this is a very nice bluey green colour that's going to give us a lovely base. Again, take your time around areas that are going to be painted a different colour. You don't have to be too tidy with this stage because generally we are going to be painting over all of the other areas that we're going to come into contact with at this point. With both of those base colours down, I'm now going to take some Nuln Oil and paint this all over those areas. Now again, you can be fairly messy with this, but what I will say is if you get it around any of the armour panels, spread it out so that it doesn't pool and potentially give you a nasty lip for when you're repainting later on. The other thing to do is to make sure it doesn't settle too heavily in the recesses. When that's completely dry, we'll start to highlight all of the silver, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Chrome from Vallejo Model Air. Now, this is a fairly easy and straightforward step. Generally, we're going to try and drag our brush along any sharp edges that we've got. Where we haven't got those sharp edges, we just want to make sure we haven't got too much on the brush and we've got a decent point, and we can just paint along the edges instead. Now, again, if we do spill it into any of the areas that are going to be a different colour later on, that's not a massive problem, but just take your time. It's a good opportunity to practice your brush skills. We move on to the leather, and there's quite a bit of this across the model, so I'm going to use some Rhinox Hode to base it. We're going to go for a reddy brown leather colour. In terms of what I'm looking to paint, of course, we've got all the straps that hold the armour on. We've also got the straps that hold the knee pads, the elbow pads, the van braces, and the shoulder pads on, and we've also got the gaiters around the boots as well. So there's plenty of leather. Just take your time because we're starting to come into areas that we've already finished now. Don't forget, if you want to see a full preview of the Kill Team Hivestorm box, you can do so on my Patreon. You don't have to pay to see it. You can just sign up as a free member and it's available to watch immediately. We'll do the first highlight using some Doombull Brown. Now this can be a fairly chunky highlight, but just make sure you haven't got too much on your brush and you have thinned it a little bit, because this means that when it dries, it will blend down into the Rhinox Hode underneath it a little bit, so it's not so stark. Generally, we're looking to catch the edges of the leather and any raised parts such as on the gaiter. We've got plenty of texture around here to drag the brush over and get some nice crisp highlights. The final highlight on all of the leather is going to be with some Skrag Brown. Now generally, if you can, drag this along the edge to get a nice crisp highlight, but if you can't do that, just paint it carefully along the edge. If you do go on too thick, you can always use some of the Doombull Brown from the previous stage just to tidy things up. You can see I've not got much on my brush. I've got a very good point on there as well. You get that by twisting as you pull it out to the paint along the palette. You'll get a nice sharp point to your brush. So just work your way around, catching those sharp edges. I'm going to start to highlight the undersuit next, and the colour I'm going to use for this, I'm going back to Lupercal Green, and I'm just going to leave that darker Nuln Oil shaded areas in the recesses. So I'm working my way across this, catching those nice raised folds, but generally I'm painting quite a lot of the cloth in this step. I'll then move to Sons of Horus Green and continue the highlighting. Now for this, generally I'm painting it inside the Lupercal Green from the last stage, and I want to make sure that I'm dragging my brush towards those areas where I want the most light, because this will just help me get a little bit of a transition on there. Overall though, I'm really focusing on those sharp folds because that's where I'm going to get the crisp highlights. For the final highlight on all the cloth, I'm going to use Sybarite Green. And again, I've not got too much on my brush. I've got a really good tip. And what I'm looking to do with this is paint it inside the Sons of Horus Green from the last step. Now, this is quite a bright green, so it's important that you use it fairly sparingly. And I'm trying to paint very, very thin lines of it so that it doesn't overpower the rest of the model. Now, I'm going to show you two ways of painting black on this model. So we're going to paint the gun casing, the boots, and the jump pack in a separate style of black that we're going to paint the armour. Now, bear in mind, there are 2 armour panels on the jump pack as well. So what I'm looking to do is take some Eshin Grey and start to highlight these areas. Now, I'm doing a fairly chunky highlight for the bolter casing. I'll paint the whole thing because the whole thing is going to be lit up. But generally, I'm doing the same things I've done previously. I'm looking to catch those edges and those shapes and just apply some of the Eshin Grey to it. Now, as it dries, this will blend down a little bit. So it's a really good start for highlighting a neutral black. Next, I'm going to take some Dawnstone and I'm going to be a lot more precise with this. And I want the highlights to be a lot sharper. So I make sure I haven't got much on my brush and I'm trying to drag it along those sharp edges as and when I can. This gives me a nice crisp highlight. Again, if you make any mistakes, you can overpaint with either black or with some of that Eshin Grey. Now, just as a final little spot highlight, I'm going to take some Administratum Grey. I'm just going to pop this very sparingly on those sharpest areas because this is just going to help give me that really crisp highlight. This stage can be completely optional, so don't worry about it too much. We'll move on to painting the armour next. So like I said, we're going to do this slightly differently. If you need to, go back in and paint over any mistakes using Abaddon Black. And we're going to start off with Dark Reaper. Now, the Dark Reaper is a very thin paint, so you're going to have to put 2 coats of it. And what we're looking to do with this is generally a little bit of an area highlight rather than an edge highlight. So I'm going to stipple it across the chest. I'm going to drag the brush in certain directions across the knee pads and the shoulder pads where I think most of the light is going to sit. And like I said, this is a fairly easy and straightforward stage, and I'm not really glazing per se, but when I add that second layer on, I probably won't go all the way from the start of the Dark Reaper. I'll go more towards the middle, and that'll just reinforce how I'm applying it, and it'll give me more of an opaque coat where I want it. The next highlight on all the armour is with Thunderhawk Blue. Now, for this, I am going predominantly for an edge highlight, and I'm looking to drag it along the shape of the model if I can, but I'm really focusing on those edges, and I'm making sure I haven't got too much on my brush. Now, the Thunderhawk Blue doesn't always apply particularly well, so you may need to put 2 coats of highlight on, but it's going on okay at the moment for me. If I'm making any mistakes, I'm just going to paint over them either with some Dark Reaper or with some Abaddon Black. Now, the last highlight on the armour is a very thin highlight, and it's a mix of 50-50 Thunderhawk Blue and Fenrisian Grey. Now, you can go pure Fenrisian Grey, but I think it's a little bit too powerful. And for this, I'm making sure I paint it inside the Thunderhawk Blue from the previous step. And I'm also making sure to use it very, very sparingly. I'm not going across all the edges. I'm just going on the sharpest parts. Now, I noticed that the Aquilons have got some markings on them. They've kind of got a V shape on their right shoulder pad and their left knee. So I'll show you how to do it on the shoulder pad. Technique is the same on the knee. The colour I'm using is Fenrisian Grey. And all I'm looking to do is draw a straight line from one point to another. In this case, the V comes to a point on that middle stud on the bottom plate. So generally, I just need to draw the line to that area. And then whatever point I use to start on the shoulder pad, I'm then going to use the other side of the shoulder pad, the same point, to draw back into the middle of that V. I'm then going to thicken the lines until I'm happy, and that's going to give me a really nice and easy V. So we'll just highlight it a bit next. The first highlight, which is going to cover the majority of the marking, is going to be with some blue horror. So thin this down a little bit, make sure you haven't got too much on your brush, and just paint it across the areas that are going to be in the light. So on the shoulder pad, for example, it's just really the top half of the bottom part of the marking, but it's all of the marking across the top half that's going to be in the light. I'm then going to add a little bit more of a line highlight using a 50-50 mix of blue horror and white. Now I'm using AK white, but you can use whatever white paint that you want. Now, if your lines are not completely straight, or you just want to add a little bit of battle damage to them, this is a really easy step. I'm going back in with some Dark Reaper, and I'm painting some very thin lines across the edges where it's a little bit rough, and also stippling a couple of dots in the middle, so it just looks like those markings have been knocked during the orbital descent, and they've weathered up a little bit, showing the paint underneath. There's not much gold on this model, so if you want to paint the hilt of the Power Sword silver, you can do so, but I'm just going to take some Dragon's Gold from 2 thin coats and paint the handle. I'm then going to base the face. Now this takes 3 coats of Cadian Fleshtone over black. Just make sure you have thinned it with a little bit of water so it moves around nice and easily, and it doesn't go on too thickly obscuring detail. I'll then take a little bit of Reikland Fleshtone and I'll wash the hilt of the Power Sword, and I'm also going to wash the face, but I'm not going to wash the entirety of the head. I'm just going to focus on the ears and those facial features, because if I wash the entire head, it's going to take me a while to layer up the Cadian Fleshtone afterwards. I'll highlight the hilt of the power sword using some Glistening Gold from Two Thin Coats. If you haven't got this, then you can use something like Liberator Gold from Citadel. Absolutely fine. We're using very little of this, and in fact, we'll use very little across the squad as a whole. Next up, I'll start to highlight the face, and I'm going back in with Cadian Fleshtone, and generally I'm looking to highlight all of the face, leaving that Reikland Flesh shade in the recesses, so we're probably going to use quite a bit of Cadian Fleshtone for this stage. Then I'm going to go to Kislev Flesh and continue to highlight, making sure this stays inside the Cadian Fleshtone of the previous stage. Start to build up some of that texture across the forehead, but generally just staying inside of that Cadian Fleshtone, really focusing on the brow, the eyes, and the cheekbones. I'll move up to Flayed One Flesh next, and again, this is focusing even more across the brow, the cheekbones, a little bit on the jaw, and across those wrinkles on the head of the model. In terms of painting the moustache, I used the same greys I did on the black armour, so Eshin Grey, Dawnstone, Administratum, and then I took some AK white and just used this to paint all of the lenses and the power node on the sword. To get a really simple glow on that power node, I just took some Frostheart contrast paint and painted it over the node. So this makes it nice and bright over the white, and across where you've got the metallics, it's a little bit darker, so it looks a little bit like a glow. I then used contrast paint on the lenses, so I used some Baal Red contrast paint, and I also used some Striking Scorpion contrast paint. So there we have it. I've based this Aquilon to match the rest of the squad and the kill team area he's going to be fighting in, and I'm really happy with how he's turned out with a slightly alternative take on the official scheme. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and a comment down below. I'm so grateful for you watching, and I will see you next time.